Hey guys, what's up? And welcome to today's live Q&A. Nearly screwed up already. But anyway, welcome to today's Q&A. So, of course, we missed last week. I was running a live challenge and believe it or not, for the first time in God knows how long, I didn't have any questions come in. So we skipped last week and this week we're back with a vengeance because we've got around 10 or so questions to answer. Lots of questions have been coming in throughout the week. Based around various different things as well. So there's going to be a lot of different takeaways and different aspects of health or issues or scenarios, situations that we may face as we're trying to sort of build our health, transform our bodies, and so on. So today's session, I can't guarantee it, but it'll probably be around 40 minutes to an hour. But I will try to keep it short and sweet. But as you guys know by now, sometimes I like to go into detail and so on. So I'll try to keep it enough and not keep you here too long. And as we've got quite a few questions, I'm going to jump straight in. So let's get on with our first question. So hold on, let me just adjust this here. Right, our first question is, do you have any tips on how to stay consistent? Now, believe it or not, this is a fairly common question in reality, and I get lots of different variations of it. Oh, how can I stay on track? Or what sort of advice can you keep me to help stay motivated and things like that? So it's all based around the same thing. Now, when it comes to staying consistent, the first thing that we have to kind of get our head around is the fact that the game or the idea of health or transforming our body, etc., is not a temporary thing. Like these changes I'm making, whether these specific ones now or the changes I'll make over time, they're designed to be a permanent fixture in my life. Like I'm not trying to just change my behavior for a temporary period of time in order to elicit a particular outcome, and then I can revert back to my old lifestyle. Because the catch is, as we know, if we revert back to the old lifestyle, we revert back to the old results. And for many of us, even further back. So we've got to be careful with that. So the first thing with how do I stay consistent is accept and obviously know that in reality, in order for you to keep your results, you're going to have to maintain the new habit or behavior. Now, of course, the level at which, and you might tweak some specific things. So the level at which you need to maintain it may be able to back off a little bit. And what we might find is, say, for example, oh, I got started on my health journey, and when I initially kicked off, I was using keto. But then by the time I actually got to my results, I realized I didn't need to be quite so extreme and I could actually eat a bit more balanced. And now that I've learned to understand my body and the way it responds, I don't need to use any particular specific diet. I just make sure I'm sticking to healthy proteins and good clean veg and so on. And that way I can do it without needing a strict diet or a specific protocol to follow. But we understand that, well, the habits I've made will need to be sustained if I want my results sustained. So that's the first thing really with consistency, is just acknowledging that fact. Now, the next thing is consistency gets easier with time as long as we've accepted the fact that we need to maintain this change. So what we want to do in order to sort of build into that momentum and allow us to keep consistent is generally we need to start small. So we might think big, as in I've got these big goals I want to achieve. You know, I want to earn another 100K this year, or I want to lose 30 pounds in body fat, or whatever it might be. You might have a big goal, but many of us struggle to stay consistent because the goal is too big for who we currently are. So in order for us to maintain momentum, sometimes we've got to start smaller. And I've spoken about this in previous videos before, but sometimes we need to break the goal down. So rather than, oh, I've got to lose 30 pounds, it's I'm going to lose £1 a week. So therefore, over the next year or so, I will have lost that 30 pounds. And for many of us, just reframing that goal reframing the goal from 30 pounds in total to £1 a week, often that will make it far more realistic and achievable in our mind. And that way, if it's more achievable, we're more likely to stay consistent with the habits. Because in our mind, the things that need to change in order to lose £1 are far less drastic or significant than the things we would need to change in order to lose 30 pounds. So that's one of the advantages with breaking the goal down. We go, oh, actually, that probably is a lot easier than I thought. I won't have to completely flip my whole world upside down overnight and completely throw out everything I'm doing with my diet, completely change my exercise routine. Actually, I can just make a couple of tweaks and then I'll get that £1. Then I maintain those couple of tweaks and I get another pound and another pound and another pound. And then the moment it slowly starts to drop back and, oh shit, I haven't lost as much this week, we can add in another little tweak rather than lose 30 pounds. I need a new diet. I need extreme calorie deficits. I need this and that, which you don't, but that's the sort of stuff we think we need. So that's the main thing. Accept and acknowledge the fact that you've got to maintain this for life in reality, or you'll never be happy and you'll constantly be up and down. And then the second thing is think big, act small. So break the goal down into smaller chunks, and you'll very likely find it much easier to maintain your habit and therefore your momentum. Cool. So that is our first question nailed. Right, now, question number 2. Do you have any habits or tips on how to implement one new strategy or one new habit? Sorry, do you have... Oh, right. Sorry. It's because the question's worded a little bit strange. It says habit tips of how to implement one new habit more effectively. Okay, so basically, do I have any tips on how to implement one new habit more effectively? Yes, I do. And that basically is what we just spoke about. The best thing to do is break it down and make it smaller and more achievable. Now, to kind of expand on that idea, if we're looking at it, I keep looking up here because I'm reading the question again. If we're looking at it from the perspective of, well, how do I get this one new habit maintained, or how do I make this consistent again? We need to make sure that the habit we're picking is both in alignment with the outcome that we want. So this new habit that I'm going to adopt will move me towards the goal, because sometimes we just think that, well, if I just change something, something will happen. And that's not always the case. So we need to make sure that it is specific to the outcome that we want. So we picked a habit that will get results, because once we start getting results, we're much more likely to maintain it. And then the other thing that we need to make sure is that this particular habit is something that aligns with my core values. Now, many of us don't really consider core values and things when I'm just trying to lose weight, or I want to get healthier, or reverse a chronic disease. But quite often, we have been acting in alignment with a particular set of core values that have taken us away from health or away from the body that we wanted. Now, when it comes to habit change, we need to go, okay, well, if I'm going to change my habits and my behaviors and ultimately who I'm being, maybe I need to look at how my daily actions align with my core values. So, for example, if I have a core value that's based around being with friends and family and socializing and having a good time, which may include, for example, eating out a lot or drinking alcohol as part of my fun and enjoyment. Well, if I now have to sacrifice that, or if I perceive that I have to sacrifice that in order to lose weight, there may be a part of me that resists significantly and won't allow me to let that go. So instead, what I end up doing on a regular basis is sabotaging myself because I'm not willing to let go of that particular core value. That particular core value doesn't align with the outcome that I want, or at least I don't think it does. So we need to go, okay, well, does this habit align with the outcome that I want? And then does it also align with my current core values, my belief in the way I believe I should think, feel, act, and so on? Because if it doesn't, again, I won't maintain it. So we want the habit to align with core values. Now, sometimes it's a case of, all right, well, I just need to shift that core value. Maybe it's a case of, well, I can still socialize, I can still drink alcohol, and I can still spend time with my friends and eat out, but maybe I need to just change the way I do it. Maybe if I do eat out and drink out, I'm only allowed 2 drinks instead of the 5 that I'm currently having. Or maybe if I pick a meal off the menu, it has to be one that's at least roughly in alignment with the outcome that I want. So rather than, for example, having the pasta bake, maybe instead I'm going to have the steak this time, or whatever the goal might be. We can tweak and adapt on based on that outcome that we're after. But if we can get it nailed and align it with our core values, we're much more likely to stick to it and find that it's less of a struggle, less of a fight with ourselves all the time in order to maintain our progress. Cool. So hope that one helps on how to implement one new habit. Now, our next one is... where are we here? Time management tips of how to fit in healthy meals, workouts, plus family, work, social balance. Okay, cool. So time management tips. Basically, we all have this idea of, like this work-life balance, and I've got a good social life. I've got a good work life, and of course, a good home and family life, and so on. And you can have it, but it often will require boundaries. Because the catch is, for many of us, we have no real boundaries on our time. We have no boundaries on how we allow others to dictate how we spend our time. And because of that, we tend to get kind of thrown around and knocked about from one pillar to the next. So we need to get clear with ourselves on what our boundaries are. Like, again, this could even include the core values that we just spoke about, but it's a case of, okay, well, maybe I have these particular goals in my social life, I have these goals in my health, and I have these goals in my work or business life. And ideally, I need them all to work in harmony. But the only way that can happen is to set clear boundaries with yourself, and then have the discipline and the strength within yourself to hold yourself accountable to those boundaries. Because the catch that many of us have is we will get these great ideas. Oh, I'm going to spend this chunk of my day doing this, and this chunk doing that, and this chunk doing that. But we get knocked off kilter and pulled out of our alignment because there are so many other demands on our time and on our energy from other people. So we need to be careful sometimes about, one, how we're allowing others to influence us, but also how we're allowing ourselves to be influenced. So it's one thing for somebody to try and influence how I dictate and spend my time, but it's another thing for me to allow that to take place. So we do have to set those clear boundaries and be confident enough to let these other people know, yeah, I will be more than happy to help you, but in between this hour and this hour, I'm just not available. So that's our first thing, boundaries. Now, when it comes to time, you may have heard me say before, there's not really any such thing as a time management issue. Instead, it's a self-management issue. We struggle to manage ourselves within the span of time we have available to us. So that's more the issue. It's a case of, well, how can I manage me within the time that I have? And again, it will come back to boundaries, but also developing the ability to be ruthlessly responsible for self. What this means essentially is I'm responsible for my outcomes that I want to achieve, whether in social work or health and so on. It's like I'm responsible for those outcomes. So therefore, I'm responsible for the actions I take in order to achieve them. Now, one of those actions is, of course, going to be managing yourself within the time you have, but also making sure that the time you do spend, even if it's within the right time frames and categories, that you're spending it effectively. It's very easy, for example, to go, oh, right, well, this is my work time slot. And then we spend time just being active. We're busy within that time at work, but we're not really engaging in business. So we're engaging in what we call in the industry busyness instead. So it's like I've got lots of things I'm doing, but none of it is really moving me forward. None of it is moving the needle and actually getting results. It's just sort of keeping me perpetually in this cycle, or as we would say, like on the hamster wheel. So those are the things we need to be careful of when looking at time management. Another thing that we can do for it is get real clear with what is urgent and what is important. Now, it's a weird concept for some initially, because it's like, well, all of it seems urgent or all of it seems important. But what you'll find is there are clear definitions on each. And what I mean by that is, if it is something that is important or something that is to go in the important category, it needs to be something that is going to move the needle forward. So, for example, in my business, it might be, okay, well, I need to increase my lead generation. I need more leads coming into the business, which could over time eventually lead to more clients and customers. Cool. So what are the specific actions I need to take in order to increase that lead generation coming in? So those would maybe go on the important list. The urgent list might be, following up with client emails and so on. So it's not that they won't get done, but they don't take precedence over the important thing. So I'd start my business day. I'd walk into the office. Right, first thing I'm going to do is this checklist. 1, 2, 3, 4. These are the things that are going to generate more leads coming into my business. Once that's complete, I can then move on to the urgent list. Now, I say urgent, and the reason they're urgent is because they will get done regardless. If something is urgent, we will make the time to do it. We don't need to find it. We just automatically will get on with it. But we just need to be careful not to place those urgent things over the top of the important ones, because otherwise we'll come in, we'll get on with all the urgent things and then leave ourselves very little creative energy or our mind space to get on with the important things. So we either then end up half-assing it, or I've ran out of time now. Oh, well, I'll get on it tomorrow. Then tomorrow comes, same pattern plays out. And then we find we've gone 4 or 5 days and not done a single thing for lead generation. But then we're wondering why business isn't going up and it's just staying flat or even going down. And this, of course, is exactly the same in health. When we have specific goals that we want, we need to make sure that we're focusing on the important tasks, not the things that appear to be urgent. So I'll leave that there for today. If you guys want me to dig into this in a bit more depth, then just let me know in the comments. And if not, I will move on with our questions. So our next one is, where are we? How bad are germs really? Are they as bad for us as people say? Is being too clean not so good? Because is our immunity weakened by this? Yeah, so this is a good question. There is a, what am I trying to say here? So we need a relative balance of cleanliness, of course. We don't want to just be completely filthy and completely, let our environment become poisonous to us or toxic to us as such. So there is an element of cleanliness needed. The problem for most of us in the modern world is that we are far too clean. We're overly sanitized. And yes, like you've said here in your question, does it affect our immunity, or is our immunity weakened by this? Over time, yes. It's a bit like if you were just constantly taking antibiotics all the time. Of course, our body, one, builds up a resistance to them, but it also wipes out all of the good bacteria, the healthy bacteria that is essentially your bacterial shield or your immune system. So it's the same in our external environment. If we're constantly sanitizing everything, then our environment is now so sanitized that we've left an environment where pathogenic or bad bacteria can now proliferate. So in order to prevent that, we want to allow some level of bacteria to grow. Because what we have to remember is the environment we live in is made up of the bacteria from us. And of course, we are made up of the bacteria from our environment. So we essentially become symbiotic with our environment. This is whether we're talking in the kitchen, on surfaces, in your office, in your bathroom, believe it or not. So we need to be careful not to overly sanitize, because all we're essentially doing is killing off our external bacterial shield. Because our environment will also mimic and have a lot of the bacteria that we have, because obviously we're in that environment all the time. We're interacting with it, touching it, breathing on it, and so on. So we end up, as I say, with this balance between the two environments that works in harmony. Now, of course, if we're eating junk foods all the time, then our inner environment becomes compromised. If we're overly sanitizing all the time, our environment becomes overly sanitized and liable to pathogenic bacteria. If we're constantly using soaps and detergents on our skin and our body, then our skin, the environment there, becomes susceptible to bad bacteria. And what we often see, if someone is too clean, they are more susceptible to things like psoriasis and skin issues and outbreaks and so on. Now, a lot of this, believe it or not, comes from the gut, because often the gut will express its symptoms through the skin, etc. But also, if we're overly clean, overly sanitized, then again, as I mentioned, bad bacteria can take hold and root itself in certain areas of the body. And then we see these symptoms, and no matter what we try to do, they don't seem to go away. So it's just about maintaining that good bacterial balance. In an ideal world, we want roughly sort of 85% good to around 15% bad. Now, of course, that's not something we can just sort of take out a stick and measure each day. But if we are thriving and healthy and the body is functioning well, that's often what we will find. We've got this good balance of around 85% good or symbiotic bacteria to around 15% bad. Now, this bacterial balance is pretty much equal to what we would see in healthy soil. So healthy soil, I'm sort of pointing backwards here, it's because of a field right behind my house. But healthy soil has a bacterial balance of around 85 to 15 as well. So again, because we are obviously an extension of nature, we ideally would be symbiotic with that. We would work in alignment with it. and not against it. But then what we see in the human body when we become ill or our bacterial balance gets shifted, then it tends to flip, and we see 15% good and 85% bad, which is what we often see in overly farmed or commercially farmed fields. Because much of the good bacteria is killed off through herbicides, pesticides, fungicides, rodenticides, etc. We then see this disbalance in the soil, which unfortunately means then overall the crops aren't as healthy, which then means the animals eating the crops aren't as healthy, which then means that we eating the animals and the plants that fed off that soil are not as healthy as well. So we see this chain of events that essentially stemmed from the soil health, which then obviously influences and affects our health, which is, of course, why, without getting into all the details and research today, why I would always recommend, where possible, if your budget can allow, you would buy organic. Of course, even organic these days, some of it is being screwed up and so on. But if you buy from somebody that has a genuine certification, and it's even better if they're local, because you can actually go and check out their farm, check out their practices and so on. But where possible, you'd buy organic or what's the other word? Biodynamic is the word I was looking for. So you'd want organic or biodynamically farmed, which is shown to be even better and more healthy than organic certification. So that's what you would ideally want. But if not, you just do the best you can with what you've got. And obviously get in contact, touch nature where you can, because that will keep your immunity high. And then if we don't over sanitize our environment and our skin, then that will now enable you to, again, remain more healthy as well. So I'm not saying don't clean, use hot water and so on, but don't always use bleachers, detergents, sanitizers, and so on, because unfortunately they will, over time, lessen your level of health and vitality. Cool. So I hope that helps on that one. We've got some questions coming here. Yeah, good tip, true. This video is important but not urgent. Exactly. I would agree. This video is important but not urgent. Absolutely. Wicked. Right. So our next question is, about Manuka honey. So Manuka honey, is it as good as they say, or is there a better one? Okay. So there are lots of different types of honey. So there's obviously there's Manuka honey from bees. There's almond honey. You can get chestnut honey. What's the other one? Clover honey. There is thyme honey, pine honey as well. So there's lots of different types of honey, all essentially the same type of thing, in the respect that they're all just a form of sugar. But of course, there's sugar that comes with a relatively high level of nutrients as well. So better than, of course, refined white table sugar and so on. So Manuka honey, the main reason that Manuka honey is the one sort of touted as the be all and end all is because of its strong and highly effective antibacterial and antiviral properties. So a lot of people obviously find that they get good benefit from it if they feel like they're coming down with a cold or they're a bit under the weather. Because of that antiviral and antibacterial aspect, it can be very beneficial for some people to help them get over their illness or prevent the illness from fully developing and so on. So that's why Manuka honey is like the king of honeys, so to speak, because of that aspect. So whilst you might want to experiment with others, most people, when they do, they tend to always find that they end up back with normal Manuka honey, because of the fact that it is more effective and often is a better supplement to the immune system. Now, what was I going to say? It's just evaded me now. Okay, cool. This is good. I look good right now because it's like, yeah, you were about to say something and you can't remember what it was. Yes, sorry, the MgO content. So the methyl glyoxal content is the key, though. So we're talking Manuka honey. We want it to be effective for helping with our immune system and maybe killing off some bacteria and things. So it's the methyl glyoxal, or MgO. You'll see it often on the bottle. It is rated as an MgO level that you'll want high. Generally speaking, the higher that is, the more effective it will be. but just don't go too crazy too soon, because some people, they find they can't handle it. And when I say can't handle it, I don't mean suddenly it made you ill or anything, but they just find it very strong. And so often they will start with a slightly lower amount and then bring that up over time. So yes, Manuka honey is very good and effective, but again, like most things, most foods, not essential. So if you don't want it, don't feel like you have to use it just because everyone says it's good and the health industry's jumped all over it. Oh, the one other thing I will mention, though, is you just want to make sure that it is raw and unprocessed. And that goes for any type of honey. Ideally, you want it raw, unprocessed. You don't want refined and all the rest of it, or pasteurized. Some of them are pasteurized now. You don't want any of that. Raw, unprocessed, and that way it's going to still have the antibacterial, antiviral effects and so on, and it's going to be at its highest potential for giving you any health potential health benefits. Cool. So yeah, methyl glyoxal, that's the word. I lost it completely for a while there. Anyway, let's get to it. So our next one is right. Here's a different one. Lol. What about electric cars? What they give off while you're sitting inside? Okay, cool. So this is an interesting one. Electric cars, really, you would kind of have to, if we're looking at this from, well, is an electric car healthy? Is it safe? And so on. In reality, you have to just look at it like you're sitting in a Wi-Fi box. Now, if you are not sensitive to electromagnetic frequencies, then it's going to have a much lesser effect on you. Now, the general rule of thumb is the healthier you are, the less you will likely be affected by electromagnetic frequencies, electromagnetic fields, etc. So some people, even just simple things like holding their mobile phone will affect them, and they find that suddenly their hand gets real hot and they're like, what the fuck? And just from holding their phone. And obviously it's because our phone gives off radiation and so on. And for others, they don't really seem to notice any problems with that, with the phone. For others, it might be things like laptops or Wi-Fi routers. Now, of course, Wi-Fi is getting stronger and stronger. And as a result of that, some people are struggling more and more. Now, where they tend to struggle, it will be things in like their sleep. They'll go to sleep but wake up not feeling refreshed or re-energized. And it's because although you've been asleep, your system is still being stimulated by this thing. It's still being pushed into what we call a fight or flight response, or into a sympathetic nervous system response, in order to deal with this stressor that's going on in your environment. Now, an electric car would essentially be the same. Because it is electric, it's going to have a greater electromagnetic field. Of course, a normal car has it to a degree as well. But an electric car with those massive batteries and things that essentially in most electric cars are right underneath you, that is the biggest issue for most. So you might find, oh, well, I've got an electric car, I've been driving it for months, doesn't seem to be having any problem. But what I have noticed is that I am a lot more tired than I used to be, or I keep getting headaches that I never knew I had, or my joints ache far more than they used to. So you might have these subtle symptoms going on under the surface, which seem completely unrelated to anything to do with your vehicle, but it could be now that the fact that you're exposed to this new electromagnetic frequency on a regular basis you weren't before, and as a result you're now experiencing symptoms from that which seem like there's no way they would be coming from that. So yeah, electric cars, they're not necessarily going to be bad for everybody, but for some, particularly if you are somebody that is sensitive to EMF, then that might be something you want to look into. And then, of course, we often have chargers now, so the car is on charge outside all night, which, well, that's not a big deal. It's outside. But again, gives off this frequency. Same with our mobiles, like people who sleep with their phone next to the bed. It's one thing to have your phone next to the bed, pulling in signal if you haven't put it on flight mode. But then when you plug it in, that signal and that EMF gets amplified. So again, if you're somebody that sleeps with your phone next to your bed and you're not getting good, deep, restful sleep, that might be one of the reasons why, which of course is why as a health coach, we recommend over time you remove mobile phones and ideally all electronic devices out of the bedroom. The bedroom should be purely for sleeping and for sex, and not ideally entertainment and all the rest of it. Now, of course, everyone's different and each to their own. And like most things, if we're doing all of the other health things, then sometimes we can get away with sacrificing in certain places. And of course, it's not about becoming boring and giving up all of your fun. But at the end of the day, if you've got health goals you want to achieve and you want to feel good, sometimes there are some things we have to get rid of. And again, just like we were talking about earlier, set some boundaries. Sometimes one of those boundaries with ourselves is things like getting our phone out of the room, our iPads out of the bedroom. And the reason for that is because if not, often we'll just sit up all night in the period of time where ideally we'd be asleep, getting this restorative, regenerative sleep, but instead we're being overly stimulated by our electronic devices and so on. So, as I say, electric cars not necessarily bad for everybody, but something that is definitely worth considering if you're getting symptoms or you're struggling to, you're doing the health thing and you're struggling to feel as good as you think you should be feeling. Then perhaps it could be due to some of the effects of your car. Cool. Right. It's getting cold now. Is it better to feel the cold a bit or not? In reality, this is an individual thing. Now, there are lots of benefits to cold exposure. And of course, we're seeing more and more of that these days with the rise of people like Wim Hof and so on. I actually first learned about cold therapy back in around 2010, when I was first taught about things like contrast showers, cold showers, and so on, for helping to stimulate the parasympathetic nervous system and things like that, when we were looking to try and shift somebody out of their fight or flight response. So cold therapy is something I've known about for a long time and sort of dipped in and out of for a long time. I'm much more consistent with it now, have a cold plunge and all that kind of stuff that I use pretty much daily. But in relation to the cold itself, yes, it's always good to expose yourself to it so that you have a greater tolerance. It's a little bit like training at the gym. You go for the first workout and everything aches like fuck the next day. But over time, when you expose yourself to that stimulus more and more, it gets less and less. Often with the cold, we can start to do the same. So if we gradually expose ourselves to the cold more and more, we can get used to it or tolerate it more and more. We may still get cold, but we get better at dealing with it. So it's not a bad thing. And for some people, of course, it's not necessary. Not everybody needs that and not everybody wants it. But you can, of course, gain benefit from that cold exposure if that's something you want to use to kind of enhance your health journey. But if you don't want to do it by going outside, then cold showers, cold plunges, cold baths, etc., is another good way to do it. If you didn't want to just keep going outside in the cold. So yes, not a problem with getting cold. It's probably better to allow yourself to do it at least on occasion, because in an ideal world, a bit like with our training, we want our body to experience some extremes. So we want maybe a bit of extreme heat here and there and a bit of extreme cold, because the more extreme we can be, now I don't mean it all the time and go so super crazy, but if we can have those extreme changes at times, that will give our body a better ability or capacity to adapt to those changes. And then when we do expose ourselves to them on occasion, it's not going to be this massive, massive shock that knocks our system off balance. And then we struggle like heck to get back to that point of balance. At least if it's something our body and system has experienced at least a few times, then it's going to find it easier to respond to it and essentially adapt to it, and maybe even get stronger and better and fitter and leaner and so on as a result. So yeah, cold exposure, not a bad thing. Go for it. Another good thing, actually, before I move on, one of the main things I use cold exposure for is mental resilience. So there are often things that we need to do in life, whether in health or business or relationships, that are going to require a new level of courage, a new level of discomfort. And of course, we as humans, we're very good at staying in our comfort zone. But often we need to push out if we want to see expansion or growth within ourselves and our personal development. So one of the things that I do, and the reason I use cold exposure pretty much daily, is because I want to do something uncomfortable every single day. And if I can go sit in a cold plunge for 10 minutes or even 5 minutes, but I try to do around 10 on average. Of course, that depends how cold it is. So if I'm like 10 degrees, sort of 10 to 13, I'll do, say, 10 minutes. If I'm like in the 7 to 10, I might do about 8 minutes. But below that, I'm sort of 3 to 5 at the moment. So it takes a little bit of time to build up. And of course, you've got to listen to your body. So if you're in there for too long, you obviously don't want to risk hypothermia and things. But as you get used to it and you get better with the breathing, then you can push yourself further. So yeah, it's a very good thing to do. And like I say, I use it for building mental toughness, mental resilience, because if you can withstand discomfort, not because you're deliberately causing yourself to suffer, but deliberately exposing yourself to discomfort, it becomes much easier to do that in other areas of your life as well. So that's another reason why I would recommend cold exposure and stuff. So yes, all good. Right, what is our next one? So we just got 3 questions left, guys, unless any others come in. Right, our next one. This is a good question. I like this one. So this is, can you worry too much about everything? Food, water, tea, coffee, etc. Simple answer, yes. Now, I could just leave it there because it is true. Like, we can over worry. At the same time, sometimes we need a level of worry. And when I say worry, I don't necessarily mean fear. What I mean is we need a level of curiosity, desire to learn, desire to change, desire to want to do something different. So not necessarily worry too much, but we need to be concerned about it enough to want to learn so that we then take some action. But yes, we most certainly can fear things too much. And you'll notice the media does this. It loves us to fucking fear everything, whether it's food, whether it's war, whether it's famine, whether it's violence. Like, whatever it is, you might as well fear it because that's the way we'd prefer you to be. And of course, in our industry, the health and fitness industry, a lot of what is sold is fear. Oh, if you want to avoid this, do this. And the truth is, many people do want to avoid that thing. So when they hear that, they're like, oh, well, I don't want heart disease or cancer or diabetes, so I better listen to this guy. So there is an element of it. Yes, it works in terms of marketing, but at the same time, we don't want that fear to be our driver, because what we will often find, so let's say we're talking here, you've mentioned food, water, tea, coffee, etc. So let's say I've heard that coffee is bad and caffeine is a terrible stimulant and it will screw with your sleep and fuck with your hormones and all the rest of it. So now I'm scared of coffee. I love coffee. I love to drink it. But now there's this element of fear. So I might now drink it. And prior to the fear being instilled in me over it, I would drink it. And of course, my body would have the natural effect of the caffeine and so on, whether good or bad for my particular physiology. It would have that effect. So let's say it has an effect of 1 to 10, just to put this into numbers. So I have my coffee, it puts it on a 1 to 10. Now I've learned that coffee's bad and it's terrible and I shouldn't have it. But the problem is I love it and I don't want to give it up. So I still engage in coffee. But when I do, there is this energetic part of me that's now fearful of the effects of coffee. So what that will now do is heighten the effect, because there is the natural effect of the stimulant of caffeine, which we were saying, oh, well, that put me at a 10. But now on top of that, I've got fear. What if this thing is killing me? What if it's taking away from my health? What if it's causing me to have this problem or that problem or the other problem? So now that 10 is now a 20 or a 30, because we've got an anxiety that we've bolted on top of the already potentially negative stimulus that came with it. Same with things like foods. It's like, oh, what about this food or that food? Should I eat it? Should I not? I love it. I don't want to give it up. But now when we engage in that food with an extra layer of fear, the detrimental effect is multiplied. Now, the catch is, if I don't eat it and I still fear it, that also has a negative effect, because fear, unfortunately, is a negative vibration. It will push us into a fight or flight response, which means now adrenaline's high, cortisol's high, all our stress hormones, which means we're going to be breaking down muscle tissue, losing muscle mass, and depleting ourselves of muscle glycogen and all the rest of it, which means now the body needs to break down even more muscle to provide more glycogen and blah, blah, blah. So we've got this issue whereby now I'm not even eating the thing, but just simply by fearing it, I'm having a negative impact on my health. So I would say, where possible, avoid falling into the fear trap with anything. Instead, if you decide you're going to have it from a place of power. Okay, cool. Well, yeah, this may be detrimental, but as long as I maintain my health and I stay healthy, I exercise right, I eat clean, etc. Well, then on occasion I can get away with having this thing and fully enjoying it without having to fear it having a negative effect on me, because fear will take away from your health, your vitality, your positive mindset quicker than just about anything. There are a few other mindsets or emotions and feelings that are of a lower vibration, but fear is a very bad one. And fear obviously stops us from moving forward and taking like confident action, certainty in our actions and so on. That fear will knock us off. And as I say, quite often the fear itself will have a far more detrimental or negative effect on your body than engaging in the actual thing that you were fearful of. So yes, be careful with fear and fearing everything. Instead, look at it like with the food thing. There's this idea that there are good foods and bad foods, and in reality, there is only what your body brings to the table. So, for example, I might find that I eat chicken and I thrive on it, whereas someone else might eat chicken and it puts them into anaphylactic shock, or it actually just takes them away from health. They don't feel so good. They don't get as much energy. But maybe it's a flip for them. And whereas when they eat salmon, they feel amazing. But when I feel salmon, I feel sluggish and I feel a bit under par and like I can't perform at the level I could, and so on. Because there's this idea that, well, one man's food is another man's poison. And that's simply because even though we're all the same in the respect that we're all humans, our physiological response to our environment and the things that we expose ourselves to is unique. Now, for many of us, it will be similar, but it's still unique. Like the extreme to which I get pushed or pulled in any direction with my physiology will be different to the next person. And that's the things that over time we need to take into account more. When we're first starting, it's like, oh, I just need this base idea of how I should eat. And, you know, I eat clean foods and I stick with whole foods and so on. But over time, we want to tweak and adapt that so that it is specific to your physiological functioning. And essentially the way we do that is just learning how to interpret how our body responds to the foods that we're eating. We're looking out for and listening for the specific symptoms that our body and our physiology gives us based on the things that we engage with, whether that's foods, our external environment, drinks, and so on, exercise, and various different things like that. We learn to gauge and interpret our responses to those things. And then over time, it only takes around 8 to 12 weeks. But over that period of time, we become far more intimately engaged with ourselves. And as a result, we know just inherently, we look at a food, see a food or an activity that we're going to engage in, and we know automatically whether we're going to feel good as a result or whether it's going to take away from us slightly. So hope that helps. But yes, you can overfear things. So what I would say is let that go. Easier said than done sometimes when we've kind of been conditioned into thinking or feeling a particular way about certain things. But be mindful of the fact that the fear is often more detrimental than the thing itself. Okay, 2 questions left. Where are we? What about heart disease if you eat too much red meat? Okay, cool. So meat in general, you'll probably notice, is getting a bit of stick at the moment. And that's because, whether you realized or not, insects are the way forward. Of course, that's complete fucking sarcasm, but that's the sort of big push from those at the top of the pyramid who are trying to dictate food and farming and all the rest of it. So the idea at the moment is, farming, intensive farming is bad for the planet. And I would agree, intensive farming is. But farming animals, cow farts are causing climate change, which is the biggest load of bollocks ever. But that's the narrative, yeah? So the current narrative is that, so therefore we should move to insects over time. That's one of the big things. In the future, one of our main sources of protein will be insects. That's without them telling you that on average, any insects that are farmed carry around a 70 to 80% pathogenic rate. But that's another story altogether. So heart disease and red meat. Now, this is another one that comes with this narrative that we're being fed, meat's bad and so on. Now, if you look at all of the research, there is not a single piece of independent research, as in real, genuine research that's not funded by someone trying to sell you some fucking fake lab-grown meat. There isn't a single piece of research that shows that red meat causes heart disease or any of these metabolic health conditions. Now, that's not me just saying, now go out and eat all the red meat you like. because of course, like anything, we want good variety, we want good balance and so on. But there is no evidence to show that red meat causes heart disease at all. Now, of course, if you look at research or studies done by these companies that sell grains or that sell lab-grown meat, like Beyond Meat and all the rest of it, then you will see a different story, because obviously it's funded to give a particular outcome. The thing with research that we have to remember is that the outcome is often dictated by the person who funded the study. Now, that's not to say that all research is bad and don't believe a single thing you read, but it just means sometimes we actually have to research the research, because if we don't and we just take it at face value, quite often we can be steered in a direction that isn't actually going to benefit us, because much of our food industry, for example, is owned by the pharmaceutical industry. So often the direction we are steered, or they try to guide us with our food consumption, leads us right back to the pharmaceutical companies. It's just like, oh, now I'm ill, I'm run down, I'm tired, I'm lethargic, I've got diabetes, I've got cancer, I've got heart disease, I've got high cholesterol. Because of the foods that they've been telling me to eat, now I need their medicine to get me better. And that keeps us in the cycle. So it's like, oh, well, take my pills, you'll get better. Oh, wow, I feel better, which you don't 9 times out of 10. But that's the catch. So it's all about money feeding money and so on. So red meat, don't necessarily eat it every day, but if you're having it 2-3 times a week, that's absolutely not a problem at all, as long as you're going for high quality. So this is the catch. We need to make sure that high quality meat is what we're eating. Whether red meat, white meat, doesn't matter what meat it is, the quality is what's important, not necessarily the meat itself. As in, like the animal, oh, red meat's bad. So it's not if you've got high quality meat. So we ideally want grass-fed, not grain and soy-fed, ideally not intensively farmed. So we want it to be free range or organically farmed and so on, because it's when we have the intensively farmed stuff that's obviously pumped full of hormones, pumped full of steroids, and fed crap that's not actually what it's supposed to feed on. Cows are supposed to eat grass. But when we're feeding them corn and when we're feeding them soy, 99.9% of which is actually genetically modified as well, then you're going to end up with an unhealthy animal, which then means when we get around to eating it ourselves, there's no way this unhealthy animal can make me healthy. So over time, I end up losing health, losing vitality. Oh, and maybe as a result of that, I've ended up with heart disease. Must be all that red meat I was eating. But it's not. It's the quality of the meat that we're eating. So where possible, again, we would eat organic or at least free range. And quite often we don't need to necessarily go organic. If you get to know your local farmers, find out what they're doing, how they farm, what they're feeding them, what how their health is managed and so on. And quite often what you'll find is you will get the equivalent of organic, if not better sometimes, from your local farmer, because they're not engaging in the practices that are actually harming the animals, like intensive farming would be. So no, I wouldn't worry about red meat causing heart disease. I'd worry more about your overall general health-based lifestyle, because if the overall lifestyle is moving you towards health, you'll move towards health. But if it's a case of, I have this idea that I want to be healthy, but I'm still eating junk food all the time. Most of the meat that I eat is of shit poor quality. Most of the veg I eat, if any, is of shit poor quality and so on. And I'm not really exercising and I don't get enough sleep. So if we're doing all of those things, then of course it's going to be much harder for us to avoid things like heart disease, cancer, diabetes, high cholesterol, and so on. But simple, small little practices, tweak them over time, and that will help us to avoid things like heart disease, regardless of whether we're eating red meat or not. So yeah, it's more about quality rather than the specific food. Cool. Right. Now, on to our last question of the day, which is, what shoes should you wear for everyday use? Okay. So this one will essentially come down to each individual, like most things, because we're not all the same. Now, in reality, I would say where possible, you would wear something that is relatively barefoot. Now, I've done a video on this before in one of our different Q&As where I was showing you guys my Vibram 5 fingers and so on, which are a barefoot shoe with individual toes. In my humble opinion, they are currently the best footwear out there, but they do have their drawbacks. So, for example, in the winter, unless you have the insulated ones, they will take in water. If you're out and the grass is damp, or you're walking around and the floor is wet, then because of their individual toes, then water tends to get in between the toes, and then you end up with wet toes, cold toes, and feet. So from that perspective, they're not the best footwear. But in terms of comfort and function, they are. So if we're talking purely from a perspective of function, Vibram 5 fingers are great. If not, then you would get something like a standard barefoot shoe that's very soft and pliable. I think I've shown you guys these before, but if I take this one off, so this is my current barefoot shoe that I've got on at the moment. So it's got a very soft, thin sole. This one actually is quite thick compared to my other ones, which are much thinner. These have a fairly substantial tread, really. But again, they're very soft and pliable. And what I like about these particular ones is they have a wide box. So the foot bed is very wide, so it doesn't cause your toes to be bunched together and pushed in. That's the issue that we tend to have with a lot of standard trainers or shoes, is rather than our toes being able to sit spread how they naturally should, they're pushed in and squeezed together, which then over time causes malalignment of the toes, but also causes dysfunction of the foot, because our toes aren't able to spread and move properly. So therefore the proprioception and the feedback that we get from our contact with the ground, etc., is delayed, distorted, not quite accurate, and so on. Of course, the body adapts over time and learns to deal with it, but it's still not optimal. So best, I would say, Vibram 5 fingers. Second best, a barefoot shoe of some sort. And then following on from that, you would just want a good quality training shoe, but one that's wide enough that your toes aren't pushed in. Of course, if you prefer to wear shoes, absolutely not a problem. But again, nothing too hard, too rigid. And again, you want it fairly wide so your toes aren't all bunched up and pushed together. Now, the one thing to bear in mind, if you're like, oh, Ty says use barefoot or barefoot shoes, you might want to gradually transition yourself into barefoot footwear if you've been wearing standard trainers, standard shoes for a long period of time, because sometimes there is a period of adjustment required. What will happen to some people is they will switch straight into barefoot and forget their other shoes kind of thing and stop wearing them. And what they'll find is their feet ache, their feet hurt, their back might start hurting, their knees hurt, their hips hurt. Now, this isn't everybody. There's just a potential that you may experience, because now your foot is getting to function totally differently. You don't necessarily have the same support that you used to have from the shoe. Now your foot has to learn how to do it instead. So what I would say is gradually transition over. So I wear my normal shoes, and then maybe initially for 1 hour a day, I wear my barefoot shoe. Then as I've done that for a couple of weeks, now I'll go to 2 or 3 hours a day, and so on. And you just gradually build it up over time so that your foot and your system has the chance to kind of catch up with what you're trying to do. We want to slowly transition in order to avoid injury, avoid pain, avoid discomfort. And that's how I recommend you do it. So just slowly, gradually move in, because if you go in too hard too soon, you might just find that it's uncomfortable, painful, might even end up with odd niggles and injuries. And then that might put you off the idea of, oh, well, I can't do that. That doesn't work for me. They're shit, which isn't necessarily the case. It's just the fact that you didn't allow yourself the time to transition and adapt into them. So that's what I recommend regarding barefoot shoes and moving into barefoot footwear. Cool. Right. Let me just double check the comments here. Make sure nothing else has come in. Nope, nothing as yet, which is all good. So hopefully we've got all of your questions answered. Of course, I will put a new post up a new Ask Tyrone post up in the Facebook group, so you guys can get your questions posted in there ready for next week's session, which will, of course, be next Friday, probably roughly the same sort of time, where, again, we'll jump in and we'll get all of your questions answered. In the meantime, if there's anything else you want me to dig into, feel free to post your comments in the comment section of this particular video. And of course, I will get those answered in next week's session as well. And if not, as always, guys, Thank you for spending your time with me. I much appreciate it. I appreciate you being here and giving up your Friday. And I look forward to chatting with you in my next video. Take it easy, people. I'll chat to you soon.